science is clear. Climate change is real. It is happening today, and it profoundly affects our health. We are experiencing more intense heat waves, droughts, and wildfires. Climate change increases the amount of airborne pollutants and results in higher ozone levels, leading to higher rates of asthma and cardiovascular disease. APHA's long-term vision is to create the healthiest nation in one generation, and addressing the health impacts of climate change is a critical step. We need your help. Please join us.
I want to thank Julio, Jennifer, and Bob for having quite a discussion on climate restoration. I know my head is spinning, but hopefully they brought some information forward for us all to consider. You know, what I remember from the conversation is that we obviously need to avoid emissions in the first place. That nature can be a fantastic source for helping to be part of the solution. But right now it's only 50% of that solution. So we need to bolster nature first. But we also need to work towards deep stabilization. And for that, we need some technological solutions, really for stabilization. But we have to get going. And it's really about a matter of investing in our future. And that investing in the solutions is much cheaper than the alternative. My daughter was listening to this session and she said, when they asked, what are we going to do with all the carbon? She says, why don't we make it into diamonds? And I thought that was a fantastic solution. So let's look into it. But we also pushed a poll out to see what you all thought about climate restoration. And what we heard from you is that most of us think that we need some combination of natural and technological solutions to restore our climate. More than 60% believe that. Some of you worry about some of the unintended consequences of technologically based climate restoration. But certainly there's more that we all need to learn about this. And several of you said that you're not sure, you need to learn more. And so thanks for Julio and Jennifer for pointing us in the direction of where we can find more information. So next, we're going to talk about manifesting ambitious vision. And I'm very pleased to welcome two special guests who have made their mark in the world and practically need no introduction. So here to talk about ambitious vision and manifesting it from global efforts down to what you and I can do in our personal lives are Christiana Figueres and Chris Anderson in conversation with Bob Perkowitz.
Christiana, thank you so much for coming. I'm sure everybody's excited to hear what you're going to say. As Megan said, you really have, both in your own ways, changed the world. And Christiana, you've been, you know, as I said before, when they write the book on how the world was saved from climate change, you're going to get a whole chapter and probably be in every single other chapter. You're one of my personal heroes. And then Chris, you know, known you for a while, and it's so exciting to see Ted move into the climate space with Countdown. I can't wait to see how you carry the ball and what happens with that over the next couple of years. So, but I wanted to start with a question that's not really related to climate change because it's something I want to know. How did you both reach the massive levels of success that you've attained in your particular fields? Like Christiana, how do you get from Costa Rica to leading the whole world to climate change solutions?
Well, first of all, thanks very much, Bob, for an overly generous introduction, and how delightful to be here with you and certainly with Chris. And we will be sharing a very exciting project that we're both working on very soon. But looking back, I honestly think there was, you know, just a whole series of forks in the road. And as I look back now, I can see that each turn had a purpose and each turn took me to the next step without me knowing that ahead of time. The fact is that, you know, as we look back on our lives, we see a purpose and we see a critical route, if you will, that is not very evident when you're a teenager or a young adult and trying to figure out where you're going. So I guess I, you know, was listening, I think, is the the verb that comes up for me when I look back. And when I look at what we're doing today, it really is about listening, about deep listening. First, listening to science, let's start there, the very basics. And then listening to all of those who have the potential to do something about getting us aligned with science. And listening to their interest, listening to their purpose, and then helping them align that with what the planet needs. And I think that for me is the kernel of success here, is to find that very productive and fertile sweet spot that is getting broader and broader every day, where we have a perfect overlay, a perfect coincidence of economic interest. Let's talk about renewable energy costs that are going down. Health interest. Let's talk about much healthier, less polluted air with less fossil fuels. Certainly the moral interest. And jobs interest, because we have more jobs in a clean world than we do in a polluted world. And so when you see that all of that actually overlays and you can optimize the sweet spot among all of that, then you have a very, very powerful multi-level lever, if you will, to push us forward. But it does require listening. It requires listening to everyone and to everything, and keeping in mind all of those threads and then weaving them together in a harmonious way.
Well, it's amazing what you did with COP21, with so many countries and so many people and put together a framework to bring the whole world together around climate change. And Chris, I can't imagine the number of people you've educated, the problems you've solved, the happiness you've spread, the people that you've inspired with TED. You've taken it from a relatively little-known conference in Monterey to a global phenomenon. How did you manage to do all that?
Serendipity definitely plays a huge role, and listening, like Christiana. In my case, I think what I listened to was the ideas that I found powerful. So I fell in love with this conference, TED, 23 years ago, had a chance to buy it, and having bought it and put it into a nonprofit, I started listening to a few many TED Talks. And a lot of the TED Talks at the time in the early 2000s were about the idealistic potential of the internet, that information wanted to be free, that there were things that you could do online in terms of collaboration that you couldn't do elsewhere. And so when we had the chance to, it seemed to us like a good idea to give away our content onto the internet, kind of to see what happened. From a business point of view, it probably felt a bit crazy. It turns out it wasn't crazy. By giving away the crown jewels, suddenly lots of people around the world knew about TED, and demand for the conference went up, not down. So that was good. And so ever since then, if in doubt, our mantra has been try giving it away and see what happens. So we gave away our brand with TEDx, and that led to TED being spread to 3,000 curatorial communities around the world, doing, the good work of spreading ideas for us on their own dime. So the notion of spreading speakers' ideas, the fact that one speaker, someone like Christiana, can speak on a stage and her words can then be heard by millions, that was going to happen. And we're just very lucky that we were in the right place, right time.
Yeah, I have two little grandkids, and I'm using TED Ed to educate them. I mean, it permeates. The radio station is really, really created a phenomenon that just does so much good. And now you're both on to, well, Christiana, you're on to something new. Why don't you talk about your current project? And if you've got something new coming up, you can feel free to announce it here. But what are you working on, and what are you trying to accomplish now?
Well, I'm not going to steal Chris's thunder. I'm going to let him present Countdown because it was absolutely his idea, and he has very generously invited us to partner with him on that. But it is truly one of the most exciting things happening this year anywhere in the world, and it is truly global. So I will let Chris go into that. in addition to the very exciting countdown effort, one thing that we have realized after adopting the Paris Agreement is that we did not capture clearly enough the urgency of climate change for many different reasons. One was political, one was the absence of very granular science. But with the publication 3 years after Paris, because the Paris Agreement requested it, the publication of the 1.5 degree report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we now know that cutting emissions to 1/2 of where we are today around the globe over the next 10 years is absolutely the only way that we can move forward. There are many, many different paths that lead us to a stabilization of greenhouse gases and of natural disaster stabilization, but they all go through the eye of the needle, and they all go through the eye of the needle, which is half of the emissions today. Only half can still be emitted in 2030. So that has put an enormous amount of pressure on everyone. And so I'm working with several large companies, Amazon among them, to actually speed up and ensure that we are reducing emissions much quicker than we thought. So I'm delighted that Amazon has taken a carbon neutrality target by 2050, Microsoft and Apple by 2030. We have a company as highly emitting as British Petroleum, BP, that has just announced that they're actually going to leave 40% of the oil reserves that already belong to them, their oil reserves, they're going to leave those in the ground, and they're going to be investing so much more into renewable energy. And so I'm really welcoming and working with all of these large companies whose purpose it is to say, yeah, the Paris Agreement is pretty good, but honestly, even in the Paris Agreement, we don't have the urgency that science demands today, because today we have much, much more clarity of science. So anyone who is speeding up and reducing their emissions way before 2050, which is what the Paris Agreement says, count me in, because that is the way to go.
Yeah, with COP21, the whole concept of a greater ambition and renewing your commitments in 5 years, expanding the ambition. That's what, and I have been so impressed with Microsoft that they are not only eliminating their emissions, they're going to eliminate all their historical emissions by 2050. And anybody that actually does that, that is the pathway to saving the world. And it's so nice to see Microsoft leading the way with that. And, it makes my heart warm to hear that. So Chris, I don't know what's public about Countdown and what isn't. I saw the opening thing that you did on a small stage in New York with Christiana. Tell us what you're doing now.
So about 18 months ago, TED decided that ideas were spreading was all very well, but it wasn't enough in some cases, that some ideas, even if they spread to millions of minds, might not actually activate. And then what good is that? And so as an organization, as a nonprofit, we've begun leaning into impact and how to turn good ideas actually into impact. And of course, the first really big idea that mattered to so many people in our community is the idea that we really must address climate change. And so we pondered what we could do. Essentially, TED, can play a convening role. We bring together, arguably the reason the conferences work is we bring together people from many different disciplines, and magic happens when they catalyze each other. So in the climate space, is it true that there are people who have been working in silos to some extent? Political leaders, business leaders, policymakers, scientists, activists, artists. I think it is true to some extent. And so the dream was, what would happen if you brought people together from these different groups and gave them a chance to raise each other's ambition, to tap into each other's skill set, to allow each other to move the bottlenecks that were stopping them going forward? What might happen in that case? Now, this was something that we couldn't do with our own resources. And so thrillingly, we were able to partner with a group called future stewards led by Lindsay Levin, and a key participants in that group are Christiana Figueres and her partner Tom Rivett-Carnac, and a group called We Mean Business, and many, many others. And so we created this idea of what was initially conceived of as a big global event called Countdown, as in we have to count down these emissions. We have to count down first and foremost to 50% by 2030, and then all the way down to zero. That is what the world must do. And so, yeah, Countdown was originally going to be a big conference held this October, bringing together those different groups, and accompanied by a global gathering around the world with our TEDx community, because of a certain virus. All events like that, of course, have not been able to happen physically. And so the physical event is now taking place next October 2021 in Edinburgh. But we are kicking things off this October with a big virtual global event on 10/10/2020, when we're inviting everyone in the world who wants to come online, to gather their family, their colleagues, their friends, and immerse together in the most important issue of our time, to remind the world that, boy, if you thought the pandemic was a danger to humanity, just wait. If you thought that when scientists make a warning about a dangerous disease that spreads and get ignored, that is a danger, just wait when you see people ignoring scientists warning about an even bigger danger. And to seek to reawaken the incredible momentum towards climate that was there, a year ago, 8 months ago. And of course, in the last 8 months, so much of the world's attention has been snatched away from this issue. It's painful to say it. I think it's undoubtedly true. People can only worry about so much in one moment. And we have been worried about many other things, and rightfully so. But climate can't wait. And so on 10/10/2020, we've put together 5 hours of spectacular programming that will be free to anyone in the world. There are 500 TEDx groups meeting around the world who will participate. All of you will be welcome to join or to host a group. And we'll hear everything about this issue, why it matters now more than ever. But more than that, what a pathway forward might look like. This is a terrible problem. We believe it is a solvable problem, provided the world starts paying the kind of intensity of attention and ambition towards it that it simply must do. And so the pathway to that 50% cut by 2030 as the next big step, that is what we will be seeking to present. That will then be followed by a year of detailed work with different groups looking to apply cross-disciplinary thinking to getting to big, bold movement, whether it's in policy, whether it's in government action, whether it's in philanthropic action, whether it's investor action, whether it's in creative storytelling, across the board, in the build-up to next year's countdown in Edinburgh, and then shortly following that, COP. So it's definitely an ambitious initiative. It's only possible because the likes of Christiana have come in and helped us dream big about this. And it's very much an open tent issue. It's meant to celebrate the people who have been working on this issue far longer than we have, to celebrate them, to amplify the ideas that matter, and to try to act as this sort of catalytic thing that can happen when ideas intersect, when people from different disciplines intersect, to try and make some magic happen and to rebuild momentum on this crucial issue.
ecoAmerica works with what I call civilian organizations, healthcare organizations, faith organizations, community organizations all across America. And I'm always amazed that civilians don't get a lot of information on climate change if you just get the mainstream news. And so when you talk to them, like probably 80% of the people that we deal with don't know what cap and trade is or carbon sequestration is. And so the power of TED to get these ideas out, to organize the information and get it out to the world, I think can just be huge. Christiana, before I ask another
however,
question.
Bob, can I just jump on that? I honestly don't think it's necessary for everyone to know what carbon capture and storage is. I think it is necessary for every single one of us, especially those living in industrialized countries, and in that group, especially everybody living in the United States, because the US has the highest per capita emission level in the world. So what is the responsibility is not to know all of that terminology, which can be very confusing, but to do something that is actually pretty simple. To know what your carbon footprint is. What is your carbon account? How far are you in your account of responsibility toward yourself and toward your children? We check our bank account regularly. Why don't we check a carbon account? Frankly, our carbon account has a much, much bigger impact on our well-being and that of our children than our bank account. And so I do think that at minimum, each one of us has to go into Miss Google, as I call her, just type in carbon calculator, and there are many, many calculators out there, and take your most trusted organization, answer the questions, and figure out what is your carbon footprint per year, usually. It doesn't mean that you have to go on a whole guilt trip because you live in the United States and the average per capita is much higher than any other country. No, it doesn't. It's not about blaming. It's not about going on a guilt trip. It's about establishing the starting line. Everyone has a baseline. We should all know what our baseline is of our carbon emissions, and then we can, having established the baseline, knowing how much we're emitting and from where those emissions are coming, because that's what the carbon calculator allows you to do, then we can start planning. And frankly, there is no one who cannot take their carbon footprint and make a plan to reduce that carbon footprint by at least 1/2 over the next 10 years. When I say no one, let me define that. No one who has access to a monitor and to internet. There are, unfortunately, too many people who do not have access to electricity, to a monitor, to internet. That is not the population that is responsible for emissions. It's all the rest of us. And we have that responsibility and that opportunity, because we will be having many different changes in our life over the next 10 years. We will change our habits. We will change our things that we have in our life. And every time we do that, we should look at it through the lens of carbon emissions. We have to be able to be responsible about this. So it's not that everyone needs to know these, weirdo acronyms and all of that. And climate science is probably one of the most complicated sciences in the hard sciences. We don't all have to understand. I don't understand all of climate science, but we do have to understand what my responsibility is. How am I contributing to the problem? And then figure out, how do I contribute to the solution? Every single one of us can contribute to the solution. Everyone watching this and everyone with access to a monitor, internet, and electricity.
We started out this summit this year with Naomi Oreskes, and she wrote Merchants of Doubt, and she's got a new book out coming out that just came out last fall. It's called, Why Science? And she's trying to get us to move forward on that. But one of the things that came out of two things. One is the concept of a wicked problem. Is it a wicked problem, or is it a relatively straightforward problem? Stop burning. And then she said, well, it's not a wicked problem. There's a lot of wicked people out there that are causing the problem. And but then she said that with Merchants of Doubt, that every time there's a push toward climate solutions, let's say Copenhagen, let's say Paris, and it looks like something's going to happen, Waxman Markey in the United States, that a lot of forces just seem to come out of the woodwork and put a lot of misinformation and do all kinds of things to stop it from happening. And so, how is it different now than it might have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Are we going to be facing this big battle of denial again, or are we winning that? Either of you.
Chris, do you want to go first? I'm happy to jump in, but go ahead.
I mean, I think one of the exciting things that has changed or is changing in the world is that companies are becoming more vulnerable to having to change what they do. I think for a typical citizen, it's quite possible that your biggest chance of actually making a huge impact on the world, in addition to the carbon calculation that Christiana was talking about, is to try and organize a few people at your company. It might be as few as 6, to put pressure, to ask yourself questions of leaders. What is your plan here? Because every company CEO, not every, the large majority have families, they have kids, they are in a community, they are being asked questions every day. And the questions that those kids and those employees are asking are getting much sharper, and rightfully and essentially so. And that, I think, is where huge change can happen, where people just suddenly feel we cannot, in all clear conscience, continue with business as normal. A few companies, because of the huge financial stakes involved, may drag heels and so forth. But I think there really are genuinely encouraging signs that business wants to move on this. And employers can play a huge role by helping businesses take seriously the agenda of, basically, matching or bettering the Paris targets and helping put their company on course, using science-based targets to be on the kind of reduction that is reasonable for that company, for that industry. So that's where actually I see a huge amount of hope. And Christiana's work with Amazon and other companies is proof. And by the way, a lot of that was also driven, I think, by pressure applied by some employees. A relatively small number of employees at those companies have had massive impact.
Well, Jeff is out there really with the climate pledge and everything else he's doing. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. I haven't gotten a lot of news on the Earth Fund and on that, but it seems like he's stepping up to the game too. And if we can go carbon neutral by 2040 instead of 2050, that is such
all better.
All the better.
Yeah. And to your question, Bob, I think we have to understand, stepping back from this and looking at it a little bit dispassionately, if I can conjure myself to do that. We are in a transition. There's no doubt that we're transitioning from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy. Now, as with any transition, you have evidence and facts that point to both realities, the reality of the past that we're moving beyond and the reality of the future toward which we're moving. Both are present at the same time. That's basically what you have in any transition. So you could choose, if you so want to, and there are many that make that choice, you can choose to put on your negative glasses and go and look out for evidence of everything that is not moving. Or you can choose to put on your glasses and go out there and look for the evidence of things that are moving forward, which happens to be Chris and my choice. And so just to give a flavor of that, over the past 5 years, because you asked about the 5 years, over the past 5 years, we have had a major shift in capital markets because investors have finally understood that it is in their interest to protect their assets against destruction and against exponentially increasing risks. And so you have a group like the Asset Owner Alliance that is already 40 of the largest institutional investors of the world, bringing together $5 trillion, who have already banded together and said, we're going to help each other to get to an investment portfolio of net zero by 2050 at the latest. And the way they're doing that is they're putting pressure on the companies that they partially own. And they probably partially own all companies, or a really impressive portion of companies around the world, for those companies to go carbon neutral by 2050 at the very latest. And you have, a series of banks, of insurance companies that have already said over the past 5 years, we are not going to invest anymore in coal plants and coal mines, because, I mean, you could argue from the morality point of view, but they don't, because that's not their case. They argue simply from a financial risk point of view. Coal is too risky. It is no longer competitive with the alternative energy sources. So they're moving out of coal. They will soon be moving out of oil and gas. Let me come back to my, BP example. BP made this announcement on August 4th. On August 5th, their value in the markets went up 7%, because the markets are recognizing that this is where their long-term, in fact, their medium-term interests and their long-term interests are better protected. So economics is on our side today much more than where it was 5 years ago. The other thing that has majorly shifted over the past 5 years is young people on the streets. Honestly, every single demonstration that there was against a cop, I was out there in the demonstrations, because I wanted to support those demonstrations, because those are very helpful political wins to increase ambition inside. And I was at every single one, but it was never enough. And now, pre-COVID, and let's see when they will be able to pick up again, but the fact that we have millions of children and youngsters in the streets in 130 countries around the world, asking us adults, what the heck are you doing? What are you doing? That's incredibly helpful. And the fact that young people no longer want to sell their brains to companies that are being irresponsible, and they say, no, give me a responsible company. That's where I'm going to apply. So I think both economics and the pressure from young people are two of many new factors that have come and joined the pressure toward low carbon over the past 5 years. I could go on and tell you more, but that's my top two.
It's been interesting to watch all the oil companies right now. It's like almost every other day somebody's writing off 10 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion. Most of the top 100 oil companies in the world have taken write-offs, and we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars at this point. So it's good. I think the industry is on its knees and is realizing, like many of the European energy companies have, the American companies are starting to catch on to it, and with good financial disclosure and risk, stranded assets, it's really great. We have a question from the audience about personal actions and the person is basically saying that, that if we don't get presented the choices, if we don't have renewable energy that we can buy, if we don't have the cars, if the corporations are stopping us from making those choices, and the corporations are, not providing the options, what difference can we make as an individual, or should we be putting pressure on the system, or both?
Both. Go, Chris.
Yeah, I think above and beyond what you can do in your personal spending choices, taking seriously your possibilities as an employee, taking seriously possibilities in front of you as a citizen of a city. A relatively small number of people in a city can help shape what that city's policy is. There's an extraordinarily positive momentum among many city mayors globally who can act, and collectively the world's cities can make an absolutely massive difference to this problem. And then, of course, what you can do politically, what our event is 10-20-20. A few weeks later, there's an election in America. It's incredibly important that people vote on climate as well as on other issues. These things will make a big difference.
And honestly, if you eat Raise your hand if you eat. If you eat, you can already have an impact on climate change, and a big impact on climate change, right? Red meat is one of the because of the embedded deforestation, it's one of the highest emitters in the world, in addition to the fact that it is deforesting and killing the habitat of so many species. So making conscious choices about what you eat and don't eat. I recently had separate conversations with the two CEOs of the two largest veggie burger companies, and both of them agree that they frankly cannot produce enough to meet the demand that they know is coming. And they are investing into and partnering with even fast food chains, Burger King and others, to bring to everyone, not, just very sophisticated vegan restaurants or whatever, just democratize the fact that we can and we must move over to plant-based diet. It is better for our personal health, definitely better for our personal health, and much better for the planetary health. So, don't think that you need to wait for mega transformations until you can contribute. If you eat, you can contribute. If you clothe yourself, you can contribute. If you have $3 in the bank in savings, you can contribute, because you can find out where are those savings. If those savings are in high carbon, you're not doing yourself a favor, because you'll lose that value, and you're stopping the transition over to renewable energies. And if you have a brain, you can so contribute, because having conversations around the kitchen table is probably the most valuable thing, particularly now that we're in pre-election stages in the United States, as Chris has just mentioned. This election in the United States, I'm not a US citizen, so I'm going out on a limb here, but this election in the United States is the most important historical political event in decades, if not in a whole century. If we don't get this right, the destruction that can be wrought on the United States economy, on the United States identity of who it is as a country, and on the rest of the world is very difficult to imagine. Honestly, it's harrowing. We've got to get this straight.
Chris, you seem like you wanted to jump in here.
No, I was just saying, it's one of the reasons why I have hope, is that it is getting easier for anyone in the world to live in a way that actually helps the future instead of harming it. The fact that that plant-based food can be as delicious as meat for people who love meat, that is an amazing change. The fact that we've just been through a pandemic and been forced to stop flying and discovered, actually, that is quite nice. It's actually quite nice to have less time in airport lines and more time. Even though we may be zoomed out a bit, it's still a lot better than those damn airport lines. All those flights are never coming back. The fact that the cruise industry is near bankrupt, and that cruise ships are being, instead of polluting the atmosphere to an incredible extent, are being sold off for junk value, is a big deal. The fact that it used to be the case that if you wanted to drive sustainably, you had to buy a sort of range limited car and be stressed about it. And now you can buy the most advanced cars on the planet and be happy about it. That is huge. The fact that if you want to invest to make money, you no longer invest in Exxon, you invest in Tesla, that is huge. And so you're right, Bob, that fundamentally technology shifts are happening that are creating the possibility for us to claim a more beautiful future. It doesn't necessarily have to be a choice between complete sacrifice and the future. We just have to be smart. We have to make smart long-term decisions, and we can actually have a beautiful, amazing future, and one that will be sustainable, and we can avoid the worst catastrophes of climate change. So it's unbelievable that is happening. I think the pandemic, in its own weird way, is a gift. I mean, not just that it's, in one way, it's shocking. Like it's shown us what a massive reduction in emissions looks like. And it's shocking perhaps to think that the, 7 or 8 or 10% emission reduction that may have happened from the pandemic, we kind of need to do something like that every year. So that's terrifying. On the other hand, we've been given a taste of what cleaner air looks like, of what cleaner water looks like, of what it looks like to hear more birds singing, see more animals around. We've been given a taste of what it looks like to have more time that we control instead of traveling, spewing out carbon. And so I think the pathway forward has been shown us, to at least to some extent, and we have to boldly seize that and continue on that journey and not give up for the next 10 years, the next 20 years after that, to continue to seize what is going to be a much more exciting future.
It is amazing to see the difference that leadership makes. A guy like Elon Musk, making a few electric cars has changed that whole industry. That one tiny company worth more than any other car company in the world. Seth Goldman from Beyond Meats was here 2 weeks ago. Highest value IPO in the market last year. And he's making this stuff with less than 5% of the water, less than 5% of the energy, more nutritious, tastes great, in my freezer, in my refrigerator, all over the place. But you see that, and you guys are both in those leadership positions. Chris will be doing ecoAmerica TEDx on 10/10/2020, and Christiana, the climate pledge, optimism, the whole thing. Just keep doing what you're doing. Now is not the time to hold back at all. And I think, as you mentioned, Christiana, the election is a starting point. So thank you very much, and let me turn it back over to the team.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Bye, Chris.
Bye-bye.